Leadership has to be understood as a set of actions that a person does. It is not a trait, nor can leadership be seen as something that resides only within one person all the time. Because in today's context, the reality of organizations and the reality of the emerging world is so wide that leadership is a set of actions, and people in responsible positions have to know how to harness their own ability to act appropriately, as well as other people's ability to act appropriately, and give them the context. So there are three very critical aspects of leadership. The first is to understand oneself very clearly, one's own capabilities, propensities, and limitations. One also has to have the ability to understand the capabilities of one's team and one's organization. And another very critical aspect is contextual intelligence. Leadership is a combination of all of these three. Based on the way in which we are looking at leadership, there are three things that one has to learn if one has to be excellent in leadership. The first is about oneself, and that is the personal mastery. Do I know who I am? Do I know why I am where I am? And do I know what is the context? Right? So the key questions are, who am I, where am I, why am I here? And to be able to answer this in clear terms is a very critical aspect of the learning. The second is to be able to understand one's role with great clarity, and therefore, how does my action fit into the context of my team? And what are the other roles that need to be played? How do these come together? So the second focus will be to understand role behavior, and not only my own propensities and actions, but other people's abilities and other people's propensities, and how teams get formed. The third very critical part of the learning will be, how do I map the dynamic context that is the place in which leadership takes place? There are many stakeholders in every context. There are many pulls and pushes. So learning how to map the continuous dynamic flow of changes happening around you, it becomes a very important part of the learning. So the program will focus on these three aspects. One is personal mastery. The second is role behavior, oneself and others. And the third is, how do you continuously map the context, and how do you design strategies to act in ways that are clearly demonstrating leadership? The first unique aspect of this program is all the aspects that are going to be imparted will first of all be imparted in experiential ways and not through any theoretical didactic ways of teaching, which means that this is not going to be through some theory, PowerPoint slides, and those kind of devices. It will actually be very practical, because we will put people through theatrical exercises. We will put them through introspective practices and so on. So the learning is not only deep, it becomes immediately extremely personal and practical to each individual's context. The second thing is that most people recognize today that the deepest forms of understanding the self are practices and ways of looking at oneself that are drawn from Buddhist and yogic sources. So this program will use a lot of the techniques which are found in yoga and in Buddhist practices in order to help people to introspect and understand what is their swabhava, what is their natural propensity, and how can they think independently, swatantrata. So these are two things that it will emphasize through yogic practices. And the third thing that we will use, which is unique to this program, is a deep understanding of the 5 ways in which power is deployed, and which is very critical for understanding one's own role, and how a group forms a formidable, powerful combination. These 5 powers are based on an understanding of the Mahabharata, but this is not going to be like storytelling from the old and saying, why don't you behave like Bhima or Yudhishthira, but to look at the archetypes that are represented by these 5 people. For example, Yudhishthira represents the archetypal power through which one can create order and stability. Bhima represents the archetypal energy of passion and initiative. Nakula represents the power of service and compassion. And Sahadeva represents the power of knowledge and innovation. And then we have a very, very critical fifth power, which is the ability to understand dharma sankatas, to understand dilemmas, and so on, which is represented by Arjuna. So a deep understanding of how these archetypes play out in oneself, what are my particular strengths, which are the areas in which I can learn and evoke my own capabilities, is the third very important aspect of this program, which is unique. And there are some frameworks that we will be teaching, which are again drawn from traditional understanding of how to look at a context, which are very powerful and which allow the whole understanding of one's context to be very dynamic. So that is how it will be different from most other programs that you'll find.